Small spaces. 12. The bus filled with laughter. Mr. Easton chuckled and pulled out his phone. Good joke, he said. Bus broken down? I'll just notify the farm and the school. We'll have to get a replacement out. If we can't fix it, we might be here a while. Well, no day is perfect. Ollie, frowning, got out her phone. Somewhere over her head, she could feel Brian eyeing it. I didn't know they still made those. Ollie's phone was a heavy thing that flipped open. She had to text by scrolling through numeric options, and it took forever. But the phone had been her mother's. Dad had tried to get her a new one for her birthday, but she had screamed at him and thrown it across the room. No service, said the screen. My phone doesn't work, said the whole bus in complaining chorus. Ollie looked out the window again. How long had they been driving? She had gotten muddled while reading. The farm was not that far away, and they definitely had service there. She couldn't think of any no-service spots between the school and the farm, but that didn't mean there weren't any. The noise in the bus was rising, a discontented, phoneless howl. Enough, bellowed Mr. Easton. He had already stowed his own phone. Well, bad luck, he said to the driver. Care to pop the hood? I'll hop out and see what the trouble is. The driver pulled the lever for the hood, but he didn't get out to help Mr. Easton. He sank back down in his seat and stared straight ahead. Mr. Easton shrugged, pulled the lever for the door himself, and went outside. A creepy feeling ran down Ollie's spine. What had the driver said? They'll come for the rest of you? Mr. Easton thought it was a joke. Ollie remembered the driver whispering in the graveyard, and she wasn't so sure. The inside of her window was fogging up. Ollie reached over Brian, wiped the sleeve of her sweater on the glass, and looked. The trees were bare. The road stretched away flat before and behind them. The grass between the road and the forest was long and wet and flopped onto the asphalt. How long until dark? The overhead lights flickered. Ollie felt a cold tug of memory. Hadn't Beth said something about candles flickering? But this was totally different, she reassured herself. The bus had broken down. That was why the lights were blinking. What time was it? There were only dashes on Ollie's phone where the time should have been. Ollie's watch was also a compass and an altimeter. It had been her mother's. Ollie glanced at it, but only out of reflex. Ollie's mom had worn it that last day, and it didn't work anymore. The watch gave wildly varying altitudes and completely inaccurate times. The compass did not point north. Now there was a countdown where the time should have been. 45 minutes, 2 seconds. And just below that, the digital readout said, "Run," in gray letters. Flickering like the light, the word gave Ollie a strange, sharp jolt. She looked back toward the front of the bus. Mr. Easton was still outside. The driver hadn't moved. Maybe the world would be moving in a minute, or maybe it wouldn't. Ollie grabbed her backpack so that Phil couldn't put a frog or something in it and marched up the aisle. All around, her classmates talked, laughed, yelled. She ignored them. Deliberately, she took a step across the yellow line in the front of the bus. You weren't supposed to cross that line, but the bus driver didn't even turn his head. What happens at nightfall? Ollie demanded, wishing her voice didn't sound so breathless. The bus driver's mouth curved up at a strange angle, as though a child had drawn the smile on. His tongue and his gums were very red. He said nothing. Who is coming for us? Ollie asked, getting control of her voice. Still no answer. Ollie clamped down on her fear. After all, Mr. Easton was right outside, and the bus was full of people. From the front of the bus came a series of loud bangs and some unteacher-like swearing. Suddenly, the bus driver said, "Can't tell you. Already said too much." Won't tell me, Ollie thought. Not can't. She remembered lunchtime, the driver's vast plate of food, his red, biting mouth. Maybe. Are you hungry? This time the driver turned to face her. Ollie got a terrible shock. His eyes had turned white, white as an egg, pupilless. He might have been blind, except he was definitely looking at her. His teeth were perfectly white too, sharp against red lips. Ollie reached into her lunchbox, got out a quarter of her turkey sandwich. The driver licked his lips and reached out one stealthy, grabby hand. Ollie stepped back. "No," she said, "it's mine." Heroines in books always sounded brave, but to her own ears, Ollie sounded scared. "I'll trade you for it." The white eyes narrowed. "You answer my questions," Ollie said, "I'll give you my sandwich." A long silence. "Shouldn't," grunted the driver. "Fine then," said Ollie. "See if I care." And she lifted her sandwich as though she meant to take a huge bite, even though she wasn't hungry. Not at all. Right before she sank her teeth into it, the driver said, "What questions, little girl?" The noise at the back of the bus was deafening. Probably no one could hear this conversation but them. Ollie thought hard, keeping an eye on his thick fingers. "Who is coming?" she asked, "at nightfall?" The white eyes swept her up and down. Then he said, "His people, his servants." Ollie swallowed. "Who is he?" "He has many names as people have words." That wasn't helpful, Ollie thought. What are his people going to do? "Take you to him. Bargain complete." Ollie felt another twist of fear in her stomach. Trying to keep her voice steady, she said, "You said we had to get moving. Where?" The driver smiled a little. "Forest. Get into the forest. The farther you go, the longer you stay free. Maybe you even find a way out. Maybe." "Free?" squeaked Ollie. "Who are his servants? What do they look like?" The driver only licked his lips. "You've already asked too many questions. That was all the questions. I can't answer any more questions." His eyes skipped to the windows, to the kids in the back of the bus, and back to Ollie. "You run fast, run far, and maybe you'll get out in the end. A few do." He looked again at her classmates in the back. "They are lost already," he said with a jerk of his chin. "They just don't know it." "Lost? They're not lost. They're on this bus," Ollie snapped. She was getting scareder and scareder. The driver only shrugged. "Give me food, little girl. I answered your questions." His thick fingers reached out, fluttering like spider legs. Ollie's fingers were tingling with a slow dread. Numbly, she handed over the sandwich. Was he lying? Why would he lie? But arrange for the bus to break down just for a joke? That seemed ridiculous. And those white marble eyes, and the book, and Miss Webster's real terror. Think, Ollie, think. The quarter sandwich disappeared in a single gulp, the way he inhaled his soup on the farm. "Where in the forest?" Ollie asked low. "Please, will you tell me? Where can we go that's safe?" Ollie, two gleams of light shone in the driver's white eyes, and his lips looked moist and satisfied. "Good food," he said. "Dead meat, cold but good. I said too much already. Besides, nowhere's safe. Not here, not on this side of the mist." but his eyes flicked once to the left, out into the dripping skeleton forest. Ollie followed his glance. There was a little gap in the fog on the driver's side of the road. Between the trees was the beginning of a path. "They can move in the daytime," said the bus driver, almost too low for her to hear, "just not while anyone's looking. They have to stand in the sunshine world too, see, to keep the door open, and that makes them weaker. More rules in the sunshine world after all. But on this side of the mist, at night, there's only his rules. They'll grab you if they can. Now go away." Mr. Easton came bustling in through the door of the bus. "Ollie," he said, "what are you doing up here?" "Go back to your seat. There's no need to worry." "But he said—" Ollie began and stopped. The bus driver was sitting behind the wheel, looking straight ahead. Now he seemed perfectly normal. "Thanks for the snack," he said. He crumpled up the wax paper, dipped his head to lick his fingers, and seemed to peer shyly at her beneath his eyelids. "That was nice of you, Ollie," said Mr. Easton, looking surprised. "To think of the driver? But better to go back to your seat now. Off you go." "But he—" Ollie stopped again. Mr. Easton looked just as he always had, cheerful, red-faced. Suddenly it seemed ridiculous to imagine monsters in the forest, to imagine that her book was anything but a story. The bus driver was joking. Her imagination had gotten away from her, just like her dad always said. Ollie went back to her seat. Mr. Easton was talking with the bus driver, although Ollie couldn't hear what they were saying. Finally, Mr. Easton said to the sixth grade, looking irritable, "Well, phones don't work, and I'm not having any luck with the bus. I'm going to just nip back up the road to the farm and call for help from there. Mr. Jones here." Mr. Easton gave the driver an annoyed look. "Has a bum ankle. I'll have to make the walk. Shouldn't be more than 20 minutes. You all mind the driver, and I'll be back before you know it. Anyone who tries anything at all while I'm gone will be in detention until Christmas." He popped out the door. Ollie wanted to warn him, but warn him of what? She didn't say anything. The thud of Mr. Easton's footsteps went the length of the bus, following the way they had come. When the sound was lost in the fog, just like that, they were alone. A hush fell on the bus. Ollie peered out the window, but couldn't see Mr. Easton. It was as though he'd been swallowed. The mist was creeping closer. Mike and Phil began busily sticking Coco Zintner's long hair to the back of her seat with a wad of chewing gum. The lights flickered again. Ollie's watch chimed once softly against her wrist. She glanced down. 39 minutes, 22 seconds. But the countdown said the countdown now. "Run," said the compass display, flickering. Ollie's mouth was dry. "Go out into the gray evening, into the misty forest. Run," still flickered beneath the cracked screen. Overhead, the lights wavered. The driver sat perfectly still. Coco began to move her head in confusion. Mike and Phil sat back, looking innocent. Coco's furious screams shot through the bus. Exclamations and laughter erupted as Coco yanked her hair up from the back seat, trailing sticky strings of gum. Coco began to cry. I could warn everyone, Ollie thought, but warn them about what? She was shaking with nerves and indecision. She looked out the window again. Straight ahead was the road. To the right was the forest. Out the left-hand window was a vast, whispering cornfield. Ollie's stomach jumped. The field was full of scarecrows. Were there more of them? No, impossible. Not impossible, Ollie thought shakily. Very improbable. Ollie checked her phone one more time. No service. Well, she thought determinedly, I don't want to stay in this stupid bus anyway. Ollie put on her rain jacket and her hat. She hoisted her polka dot backpack higher on her shoulders. What are you doing, Ollie? Asked Brian. Coco was still crying. People were shouting questions at the bus driver, but he just sat there, unmoving, 2 hands on the wheel. The day's sun was only a memory. Ollie said, "The driver said best get moving. I'm moving." "What?" said Brian. "Where? Mr. Easton said—" But Ollie wasn't listening. She stood up, went to the front of the bus, and looked back at her classmates. In a little place like Ben Withers, everyone knew everyone else. You went to school with the same people since kindergarten. Ollie was pretty sure no one was going to believe her. She barely believed it herself. But what if it was true? All of it. The mist and the twilight, the bus driver's warning. "Mr. Easton is gone," said Ollie, facing everyone down the bus aisle. She didn't think she could shout over all the noise, so she didn't try. But the people in the back shushed each other anyway. I think maybe he's not coming back." A startled pause, and then they laughed at her. Or just rolled their eyes, or looked concerned. "Poor Ollie, you know she cracked last year." "Come on," said a blurry chorus of voices. He just went to the farm. He'll be back soon. He's not gone. He can't be gone." "Gone?" Ollie snapped. The word seemed to fall like a rock right into all the noise. Everyone heard it, and a small, awkward stillness spread through the bus. "He went into the mist," she added. "Now it's almost dark." She could see her own breath now. Ollie realized the bus was getting cold. The engine was turned off. The heater wasn't running. "Did you hear the driver?" she said. "Best get moving," he said. Another murmur ran through the bus. "Get moving? What is she saying? But Mr. Easton said he'd be right back." "Oh, it's just Ollie. You know Our phones don't work," Ollie said, her voice getting stronger. "I don't think Mr. Easton is coming back, and I don't think whoever comes will want to help." A few people were smiling as though she'd made a good joke. Others looked concerned. The bus driver gave Ollie a sly grin. "Nice try." Brian Battersby sat with his arms crossed, a frown on his face. "Okay," said Ollie. "I said it. I think you should listen. I'm going to try and get away now." She put her foot on the first step. "Little girl," said the bus driver. She turned around, looked into eyes like 2 eggs, felt a fresh jolt of fear. "Avoid large spaces at night," he said. "Keep to small." "What does that mean?" Ollie demanded. The bus driver looked all around and then whispered so that she could barely hear. "They are strong at night. Remember, they have clever grabbing hands, but stiff, and they can't grab you if they can't reach you. At night." "Who are they?" Ollie whispered. But the driver didn't answer. He only reached out and pulled the lever that opened the doors. It was getting darker. The trees dripped, although it wasn't exactly raining. More of a thick, sticky mist, like being inside a cloud. Ollie had been inside a cloud once. Her mother had taken her paragliding. Her mother loved flying, any kind of flying. Her father had said, "No, Ollie is too little," but her mother had only said, "Don't worry, Raj," and taken Ollie anyway. Ollie's mom wasn't scared of anything. But maybe she'd been scared on the last flight in the little single engine. Ollie dreamed of the crash, even though she hadn't seen it. She hadn't seen the fire afterward or the bits of broken plane stuck in a tree, the things that haunted her nightmares. She only overheard her relatives talking about it. Her father had brought the cracked watch to her at school, holding it tight in his sweaty fist. He'd sat her down right there on the bench next to the hickory tree. Ollie had heard him out, not saying anything. Heard him out until she couldn't bear to listen any more, and then she yelled and grabbed the watch and ran for her bike, pedaled to their house, never mind the freezing rain. She had run upstairs soaking wet, shivering, to hide in her window seat. She hadn't cried. She couldn't bear to cry. Crying meant it was all real, and she didn't want it to be real. Instead, she opened a book at random, read until her eyes went blurry, and then read some more. She hadn't stopped for days. She hardly ate. She didn't sleep at all. Her dad would come up red-eyed from crying himself, tap on her door, leave her food, go away again. She wouldn't talk to him. She barely saw him. He brought her pies, cakes, all of her favorite things. She didn't touch them. Maybe, she kept thinking, when she came back from one of those other worlds, when she woke up from book dreaming, she would come back to a world where her mother wasn't dead. She hadn't. But she kept her mother's watch, even though it was broken. Ollie never took it off until she got home at night, and then it spent its nights under her pillow. Now, as Ollie stepped into the road, she glanced down at it. 27 minutes, 4 seconds. The watch said now, "Run." Sunset at 6:03, Ollie remembered. 27 minutes sounded about right. She would have to trust it. Maybe the advice was good too. Run. Ollie bit a knuckle, considered the place where the driver had pointed to the little gap in the fog, the skinny path. There was a scarecrow on her side of the road. It was peering around a tree, one garden rake hand uplifted, wearing an old black suit. It looked like the scarecrow whose hat Brian had adjusted. That couldn't be right. "Hey, Ollie!" Ollie shrieked and whipped around. Coco Zintner hopped awkwardly down from the last step of the bus, right into a green puddle. Ollie glanced down at her watch. 24 minutes, 8 seconds. "Are you really leaving?" Coco asked, splashing over. "Yes," said Ollie. The back of her neck was prickling. She found herself keeping an eye on the black-suited scarecrow. "I'm sorry about earlier," Coco said. "It's okay," said Ollie, but she was barely listening. She had decided. She strode toward the woods. "Where are you going?" Coco asked, hurrying up beside her. "Why are you going so fast?" "The woods," said Ollie, trying to sound surer than she felt. "The bus driver said, 'Best get moving.' I'm moving." Coco bit her lips. "I'm going with you. They're too mean on the bus." She showed Ollie the gummy ends of her hair, and her lip quivered. "And I'm scared," she said. "This place is weird." "Okay," Ollie said, a little relieved that someone was coming with her, that she wasn't the only one afraid, even if it was Coco Zintner. "Even if we go into the woods," she said, trying to make the decision more rational than it was, "we can angle back toward the farm. There's probably a shortcut in there. We'll be back before we know it." "Look, a path," said Coco, pointing to the gap in the trees. "That way." Ollie had meant to go that way, but she didn't like Coco taking charge. "Well, yes," said Ollie, "but Coco?" Coco didn't hear. She was already running ahead, slipping in puddles. Ollie followed. They crossed the grassy, overgrown space between the road and the trees. To get to the path, they had to pass the black-suited scarecrow. It did look a lot like the one Brian had pointed out earlier. Maybe they'd made 2 identical ones. It stood there with mist lapping around its knees, smiling blankly. Just as they reached the first jumpy shadows of the forest, another voice yelled, "Hey, wait!" Both girls turned around. Coco seemed to shrink into herself, but then she scowled and crossed her arms. "No boys allowed," she told Brian as he jogged across the asphalt. Brian raised a brow. "This isn't summer camp, Coco Puff," he said. "Have you two completely lost it? Mr. Easton said to wait. He's coming right back. You're going to get in so much trouble." "I don't think Mr. Easton is coming back," said Ollie. "It's almost dark." "Don't call me Coco Puff," cried Coco. Her blue eyes had filled up. She stroked her wounded hair. "So what if it's getting dark?" said Brian to Ollie. "Way smarter to stay inside in one piece. Someone will come tonight, but the woods will be cold. You could get lost, break an ankle, fall into the river. Don't be dumb." Ollie knew the same things Brian knew about what could happen to someone alone in a forest at night. He saw her hesitate. "Okay, now you're getting it," he said. "Come back to the bus. They're all in there saying you've lost it, but I don't believe it. Come back to the bus." Ollie looked down at her watch. 18 minutes, 3 seconds. Run. The words still wavered under the watch's cracked face. "No," she said to Brian. "We have to go. Now." She headed for the woods again. "You stay here," added Coco to Brian, shrill. She hurried after Ollie. Mist curled around the first of the tree trunks, crept softly up the road. Brian stood where they'd left him. Ollie paused between the first of the tree trunks, turned back. "I think you should come with us, Brian. Best get moving," the bus driver said. "I think something bad is going to happen." Brian just stared at her like he'd never heard anything so ridiculous. The sky was the color of a wet slate roof now. Shadows seemed to be creeping out from the trees, creeping out of the noisy bus. The driver was staring right at them out the driver's side window, his eyes round and blank as marbles. Ollie shrank instinctively into the shadow of the trees. The driver, unsmiling, pointed once to the forest at their backs. "Come on," Ollie whispered to Coco. "We need to go."